Hello and welcome to the third OPA GCSE Sociology lesson. We're going to be looking at Karl Marx today. So the title is, What is the Sociological Legacy of Karl Marx? You can have a look at learning objectives in the green box there, but I'd also like you to get on with the do now. So just for the first couple of minutes, you might want to pause the video and answer the 5 following questions on the screen. What is sociology? Outline 2 reasons why sociology is important. Who created the term the sociological imagination? List as many of Durkheim's key terms as you can remember. What era of social change was Durkheim writing in? And then the stretch and challenge, what is meant by the term class? Do you think you belong to a certain class? So just pause the video now and answer those. Right, so going through the answers. So for number 1, what is sociology? At its very core, it is the scientific study of society and how groups, communities, and large organizations interact together. Number 2, 2 reasons why sociology is important. So you could have said lots of things, really. You could have said something like for your employment prospects, how you view the world, so how it shapes your life. Questioning political opinions and political matters, for challenging inequalities, and generally it just helps with your other subjects as well. It's quite a framework that helps with other humanities especially. And then it was C. Wright Mills in 1959 who coined the term the sociological imagination. If we remember, that's referring to the macro and the micro influences. And then for number 4, there's quite a few we went over, quite a few concepts for Durkheim. So we talked about the social cohesion. We've talked about the organic analogy, division of labour, social facts, and anatomy. So just to go through them quickly, I noted as well, I haven't talked about value consensus. I don't know why that's on there. That's actually for a later lesson. But social cohesion, so that's achieved when essentially society is in harmony, when everything is running like clockwork, as it were. So everyone's following the correct values and norms and roles, and yeah, everyone's doing great. The organic analogy, so that's the analogy used to describe all of these structures in society working together so that society, like organs in a body, can help the survival of society. Division of labour, so that's the idea that everyone has specific roles, and again, people are performing those roles in different social structures in order to function. And then social facts, so social facts is what Durkheim refers to as really just like an explanation of what phenomena is going on. So perhaps if crime's going up, you'd then be looking for the social fact, whatever is the explanation for that trend. And then anatomy, so that's when social cohesion is broken down. So it might be in the organic analogy, one of those structures isn't working properly. Let's say, for example, the education system. Anatomy is not always a bad thing, Durkheim argues. Sometimes it's good to show other people what not to do. It might also be an indication that something needs to change, or perhaps there's some teething issues with social change, but that's the opposite of social cohesion. And then finally, Durkheim's writing during the industrial era, during the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolution. So lots of social change going on. I'm not going to go over the stretch and challenge because we're going to explore that in the coming slides. So let's see if your idea of social class matches up with Marx's. So obviously you're not in the lesson, so you wouldn't have seen this video, but what I'd like you to do is to go onto YouTube and to watch the video. Was Karl Marx right? And it's by The Economist. So just watch that video and just note down a few points about the video. Okay. Right, so you may have completely different points, but I'm really just going to engage in those stretch and challenge questions regarding Marx. So how does it link to class? Well, Marx really is concentrating on the class struggle. So he refers to it, we're going to see it in a bit later on, as the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, this upper and lower class struggle in a capitalist, unfair system. How does it compare to Durkheim? Well, they're both structuralists, and we're going to come on to that concept later on down the line. But they don't necessarily agree on how structures work. Durkheim and the functionalists, as we'll see later on, they really like the structures in society. They think they function and they're all positive and they're great. Whereas Marx thinks he's coming from a conflict perspective. He says it's just reinforcing a lot of struggles in society. And then his legacy, well, there's lots of legacies, and you can look at it in different ways. So he's influenced communism in the 20th and the 21st century. So if you study history, for example, and you've looked at Russia and the Soviet Union, so Lenin and Stalin took a lot of ideas from the Communist Manifesto that was written by Marx and Friedrich Engels. Then there's been lots of socialist policies in lots of European nations. So the idea, for example, of the NHS has its links to not necessarily anti-capitalism, but really sort of regulated capitalism and collectivizing. So people coming together and uniting and not putting money first. So there is a legacy in this country and in other countries around the world as well. Right, so I'm just going to read through the information here. I recommend that as we go along, you are really writing down the key terms here. So the key terms you're going to want to get down are in red. Every society's development is dependent upon its people producing new things for its survival. So that may be food, medicine, energy, you name it. Marx refers to this as the mode of production. The specific mode is capitalism. Capitalism is a system of economic organization in which businesses are owned by private individuals who profit from the labor of the workers they employ. Like an assembly line, as you can see in the image, everyone has a role within this process. This is referred to as the means of production. And this is a really key concept here, the means of production. It's something we're going to be looking at in a moment. So you can see there, everyone has a specific job on their assembly line in the means of production. You've got one group of people working on the doors. You've got one group of people working on, it looks like the suspension, and then another group on the tires. So everyone has a specific role in this means of production. Simply, in the means of production, everyone performs a particular role, service to create something. Okay, so for example, my role as a teacher, it might be that your parents are builders, or it might be that you know someone who's an actor. These are all examples of roles in the means of production. Okay, but there's a lot more to it that Marx refers to in the means of production. So obviously you're not in class, so you wouldn't have done the practical, but just imagine now you've got 4 different people, okay, and they've all got individual jobs. And I'm just going to describe each one of those jobs. You've got person A, whose job it is to roll up the blue tack. Person B, who then shapes it into little human figures. Person C, who is putting a smiley face on those figures. And then person D will be the person who really is sort of collecting the money and perhaps not really doing much at all, maybe even just sitting there. Okay. This person D is in charge. This person D tells the others how hard to work and whatnot. Okay. So imagine with this, you've got person A who's for 9 hours flat is rolling up these pieces of blue tack. The same with person B and C, they're working their socks off. And imagine at the end of the shift, Okay, or let's say, for example, the end of the month. Let's say the company has earned £100,000 selling all of these blue tack figurines. Person A, B, and C. Now, this is really important that you listen to this and write this down. They do not own the means of production. They are selling their labor. They're selling their skills and their time and their efforts. Person D, on the other hand, owns the factory. He owns, or she owns, the means of production. So what that means is they get to choose how much of their profits goes towards their employees. So they control their salary. And in this situation, person D has decided, out of that 100,000, even though they've sat there, they've decided to keep 90,000. Whereas the rest of them have got to share 10,000 between them. So it's roughly about £3,333 odd or whatever, each for person A, B, and C. And I just really want you to write down, is this fair? This idea of the means of production. So is it fair for someone who owns the means of production to have such a high wage and potentially do very little for it? So in the means of production, the person who becomes wealthiest is the person who owns the production. They may not physically create something or do any work, but they choose how the wealth is distributed. So I've got two examples here, one in the image and one in the text. So the one in the text I'm going to read out first, and I want you to get down one of these examples. You can use the blue tack one from the previous side if you want. So a farmer, we're going to call him Dave, may grow apple trees and pick the fruit when ripe. He gives them to his friend Joe to sell to the public. At the end of the harvest, they make 100,000. Dave is paid 3,000 for his efforts, Joe 7,000. But the owner of the land and crops, Andrew, keeps the 90,000. So very similar again to the blue tack example, perhaps a bit more realistic. You've essentially got here Andrew, who owns the means of production. Now, he's not actually been mentioned to do anything. He's not actually worked at all for it. But because he owns that land, he owns the means, he gets to choose how the wealth is distributed and has given himself a large portion. And you can see exactly the same here in the image. So I'm just going to read out what's in the speech bubbles. So you've got the boss, this machinery is very productive and I own it. That's why I'm rich. You've got the next person working on the device saying, but you didn't build this machine. And then the following, and you don't operate it. And in the final one, in fact, you don't seem to do any work around here at all. So it's this idea again that even though he's rich and he owns the means of production, he doesn't actually do anything for it. It's not fair when the others are working so hard and earning so little. And Marx refers to this, just to really home in the idea, as the means of production and who owns it. So as a result, we have this breakdown of a class system. Now, you may have heard of the working class or the poor, the middle class, and then the rich or upper class. But Marx doesn't really have that yet. What he does talk about, though, is in this capitalist system, this increasing polarization or increasing divide of class inequality, where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Marx identifies two classes from this. Those who own the means of production, they're referred to as the bourgeoisie, in other words, upper class. And then there's the majority of people who are the proletariat, who sell their labor, and they're referred to as the lower class. So just for task 4, you might want to just give yourself a moment there just to pause the video and to write down those two different concepts, bourgeoisie and proletariat. Marx believed that this class struggle affected individuals' freedoms and life choices. In Marx and Engels' book, The Communist Manifesto, they predicted a global revolution of the proletariat masses, overthrowing the capitalist system. This capitalist system would be replaced with communism. So we've seen communism throughout history, and it's really hard to say whether Marx would have liked them or not. They've certainly not been successful. Capitalism dominates in the world today. So it's really hard to gauge whether modern communism really is a reflection of the manifestos or just a misinformed interpretation. So really what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to be going through some stats, either through the ONS or the Guardian, that really just home in this idea of class struggle and sort of this divide between rich and poor. So you've got a graph here and it shows the median household income. The average household income for Britain's highest earners is 6.8 times higher than that of the lower one. So you can see there the one where it's at 10, and you can see the one where it's at 1. It's a complete different world. You've got the bottom 10%, they're on less than 10,000, and then you've got the top 10% who are on 60, 70 plus. Okay, and that's the same, not just for an individual, but households as well. So again, the median, the average household wealth for Britain's richest decile is 315 times that of the poorest. Okay, so yeah, just again, comparing the million. So you've got, it's not even really readable, the bottom 10%, and the top 10%, that's near 2 million. We're going to look at it at a local level as well. So we're going to compare within Essex two boroughs, Thurrock, which does have some deprivation, quite a bit of deprivation. It's not one of the worst in the UK, but it's certainly not one of the best. And then we've got Brentwood, which is quite renowned in Essex does have its deprivation in parts, but is renowned for being one of the nicer parts of Essex. So you can see here in Thurrock, 13% of the population was income deprived in 2019. Of the 316 local authorities in England, Thurrock is ranked 107th for most income deprived. So it's in that top third for deprivation. Compare that now to Brentwood. So 6.4% of the population was income deprived. Of the 316 local authorities, Brentwood ranks 284th in most income deprived. So you can see that there's a massive divide even within Essex. I mean, Brentwood is a 30-minute drive from Thurrock. It borders it, and it's a very different lifestyle. I mean, if you look at the deprivation, you've effectively got nearly a 7% difference there. And then we've just got really some maps of this deprivation looking at those areas. So the ones in red you can see in Thurrock are quite deprived. Even within Thurrock itself, there is a lot of deprivation and a lot of a divide. So you've got places like Aveley, South Ockenden, Tilbury, Grays, Chadwell St Mary's, where there's quite a lot of income deprivation. But there's also pockets in Grays. There's also Orsett, and places like Fobbing, where there isn't as much deprivation. Okay, so even within a local area, there is a divide between rich and poor. And again, look, if we look at Brentwood, there's barely any in red there. There's barely any deprivation. In fact, they've got some of the better incomes. So finally, what I want you to do is just to acknowledge some of the critiques of Marxist, not Marxism, of Marx and his key ideas. So some of the benefits, he does consider how class can impact our life chances. So what we mean by life chances, perhaps how long you live, how good the quality of your life is. He considers social inequalities. So that's really important. Considers how there is a rich and poor divide. Also considers, or rather another good thing is it has influenced political policy. So I talked previously about the NHS and the welfare system, but it does have some issues. So it's a dated theory. I mean, the Communist Manifesto itself was written sort of around 200 years ago in the 1800s, maybe a bit less. It also overlooks a lot of other inequalities. So it doesn't really concentrate on race, gender, age, religion, other things like that. It's also quite economically deterministic. What I mean by that is it doesn't consider struggles in terms of your status or your culture. Class is a lot more than just money. And again, just in general, it's deterministic. It doesn't consider the individual's will. So individuals can get out of poverty, and rich people can fall into poverty based on their attitudes, actions, and merit. But also, we've had this historical failure in the past of communism. So there's a few pros and cons there. So once you've noted them down, I just want you to think about those questions just to end on. And they're going to be helpful later on in the half term. So how might Durkheim's explanation for why crimes occur differ from Marx's ideas? And what would Durkheim's view of class inequality be? How might it be different to Marx's? Right, so that was lesson 3 on the legacy of Karl Marx. The next lesson is going to move on to the final founding father of sociology, Max Weber, and we're just going to talk about his legacy before getting on to the modern theories. And I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.